Hey guys, welcome to Tokenomics and our interview with Antoni Zolciak and Matthew Niemerg of Aleph Zero. Aleph Zero, for you guys who watch the channel regularly and aren't familiar with it, is a peer-reviewed DAG, which here in the Black Jargon research report they describe as blockchain 3.0. Essentially, a DAG is a directed acyclic graph, and the key here is it allows multiple blocks to be formed at the same time, vastly increasing scalability and decreasing transaction times. And you can see, some of the features of it here in the Black Dragon report as well. For you guys who are fans of Aleph and aren't familiar with our channel, we cover early stage projects, generally pre-token generation event, and try to bring, essentially money-making opportunities to our subscribers, both here and in our Telegram. If you enjoyed the interview, please consider giving us a sub, or at least give it a like so as that it gets seen by more people on YouTube. And that's the shilling done. So we'll get straight into it and enjoy the interview, guys. Cheers. Okay, so today we are joined by Matthew Niemerg and Antoni Zolciak from Aleph Zero. Guys, thank you so much for giving up your time for doing this AMA interview. Really, really appreciate it. And I guess we'll kick straight off with, how would you guys explain Aleph Zero to a non-technical person watching this that had never heard of Aleph before?
Hi, so first of all, pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us on the show, Ian.
And how would we explain? It depends on whether the person has a background in blockchain and crypto or Web3 or not. But generally, the high-level description is it's a new infrastructure layer based on a peer-reviewed consensus protocol that prioritizes privacy-enhancing design. And I would say that's the opening, really.
Okay, and it's described kind of at a high level in your docs as a public blockchain with private smart contracts. Can you sort of flesh out a little bit what this will mean in practice and what the benefits are?
There's essentially two different types of privacy that you're trying to achieve whenever it comes to any privacy framework. The first is with data privacy, and that's if you say you have a decentralized identity. You've got your name, you have your age, you have your jurisdiction, your location, your address. So there's various pieces of data that you don't necessarily want to disclose on a public blockchain. And so then the way that you achieve this privacy is using this multi-party computation technology. And we're building out this as part of our technical stack with Liminal. And then the second type of privacy is with trying to basically anonymize various types of value transfers. So either address information, total value amounts, recipients, et cetera. And this is done with zero knowledge proofs. So it turns out that what happens is that zero knowledge proofs are rather limited in the type of privacy that you can actually get, but they're much faster as far as the types of computations that you can, or as far as the computations are concerned, relative to MPC. MPC, on the other hand, is much more broader as far as the types of privacy that it can go ahead and achieve, but that comes at a cost, right? It ends up being much more computationally slow. So what we're doing is looking at how can we combine both these two technologies together in a way that can be both private, obtain the level of privacy that people are wanting, but still maintain a level of high throughput, but with having all that security.
And that's kind of achieved, I guess, through, I heard a brilliant explanation of DAG technology in a simplified one, no doubt, but that it essentially allows you to mint or, form multiple blocks at the same time. Whereas with the multi-party computation, you have a lot of doubling up of information.
So it's actually two separate technologies. So you have your consensus layer, and then the consensus layer is running some classic, Byzantine fault tolerant algorithm. So, this is stuff that's been going on in distributed systems for about 40 years. And then you have the multi-party computation and the zero knowledge stuff. And that's essentially a secondary layer. It's more like a smart contract and sort of that you can have, not necessarily a smart contract in and of itself, but it's tools to build smart contracts that you can then deploy on the consensus layer, and then from there being able to have your dApps with these privacy frameworks and sort of embedded natively.
Okay. And I heard Antoni, actually, you say in the Telegram group recently that in terms of the smart contracts, if you were to scale it, I think from 5 to 10, you were at about 5 in that stage where the kind of logic had been decided on for them, and it was now a case of going forward and writing the code.
Sure. I mean, the issue with questions, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah.
It's not very precise, right? But generally speaking, we're inheriting smart contracts from Substrate, meaning that you've got essentially this huge framework, and the smart contract palette is already there. So what we're doing is we're customizing it and optimizing it to work well with the consensus protocol that we've designed and deployed, and then the privacy part comes after that.
Okay, and in terms of that relationship, so you guys are building on Substrate. However, if you were to become a Polkadot parachain, that would mean obviously, discarding your own consensus mechanism, which is obviously not going to happen. So with that in mind, how do you see the relationship between Aleph and the Polkadot ecosystem going forward?
Yeah, so the way you can think about it is that there's several other projects that are doing their own sovereign Substrate chains. And there's ways of, well, potentially there's a way, or at least that we can understand and that we can see, where you do what would be called an identity bridge. So you'd be able to go ahead and have some type of parachain bridge to another sovereign chain. And then the idea here is that identity bridge is essentially batching several sort of layers of transactions together, because it's got to operate, as you rightly pointed out, on Grandpa. But then the sovereign chain, the Aleph chain itself, is still running Aleph BFT for the consensus. And so now there's a way of kind of batching some of the extra transactions that occurred, more quickly on the Aleph chain, pushing them to this quote unquote identity bridge. And then from there, embedding the state information, these updates to the Polkadot relay chain. So there is some ways of kind of finagling it, where you still have like this sort of separate sovereign chain, but then you're really treating all of your updates via this sort of identity bridge, and then embedding the information that's needed to the relay chain at that point.
Yeah, and I think when I first came across this project, and again, I'm not a highly technical person, so only having an overview sense of it, but with all the things going on here between multi-party computation and the zero knowledge proofs, the DAG technology, there's so much being rolled into one here. There's, I think, a team of 20 plus developers, 5 PhDs. It's taken 4 years, I think, to get to this stage. And when I saw this and read up on this and compared it to a lot of the valuations of projects that were happening in the crypto space at the moment, it felt to me that when you guys were doing your public sale at just 10 cents per token and an FDV of 30 million, you could have far exceeded that in terms of value, in terms of fund raised, if you had wanted to. So could you kind of give some thoughts on why you decided to raise at such a reasonable valuation?
Yeah, so the issue here is more, part of it is legacy, part of it is also that we wanted to not necessarily drive hype, right? So, in this space, there's a lot of emphasis put on valuation. There's a lot of emphasis put on does the token price go up, number go up only, these types of sort of mentality. And while this is obviously, the market does what the market wants to do, we don't necessarily want to add fuel to the fire. So the idea here was more about how can we basically push for delivery of a product, and as opposed to going out and making a lot of noise, raising a lot of capital with a lot of promises and a lot of hype, but with no real substance behind it. And so then what we wanted to be able to do was try to go more of the, not necessarily traditional startup route, but probably more along those lines than you would say that happens in say the distributed ledger space. And the idea here was really more about how can we build the product first, and then once we build out the product, go ahead and sell the sell access to the public network. But also, like, it's not about our success, right? It's about everybody's success who's going to participate, and we want to empower people as opposed to trying to make this into a large money grab for ourselves.
Yeah, and also, it's true that we could have easily, I assume, raised more, but also from a business standpoint, with the core team being in Poland and in Central Europe, and not necessarily in San Francisco, that also impacted the decision. So several factors came into play, and also the fact that when we also designed the tokenomics, we started in 2018.
Yeah,
early 2018.
Okay, and like that is the whole thing that has come across to me and in this project is a very that organic approach that you're talking about in terms of community growth, the marketing, a no hype kind of system, a token sale that was utterly inclusionary at the start. If you were there, you were able to participate. There was even tokens left over from the first round, thankfully, because I just got to grab a second bag as an early bird, so I'm pretty happy about that. Frequently what we see in the space is the formation of key opinion leader groups, shill groups, projects getting hyped up to the moon. And I guess you fleshed out there that is the same kind of thought process that ran through your strategy in building on substance rather than building on hype, or rather than trying to drive price through hype.
I think it's a healthy mix. I mean, it's not like we did have influencers buy into the project, whether through funds or whether through or individually. So it's not like we're also sort of in that bandwagon. But one thing that's very important is that there will always be disclosure, or at least as much as we can control it, we want to. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, I think that hype has to be warranted by something. So if you do have a great product, if you have a very interesting adopter of the technology, whether it's like some global corporate or a very heavy brand, that's when we won't have any drawbacks when it comes to also participating and hyping the platform. But still, across the space, what we're seeing across the space is a lot of unwarranted hype, which we're not necessarily fond of. And we want to sort of go in the other direction, maybe build an image of like an underdog, but still with very, very heavy fundamentals. And if we will be able to pull this off with I would say funding that's below average compared to other L1s, that's going to be quite badass, and that's what we're betting on. So far so good, I would say.
That underdog and building on fundamentals and lack of hype is definitely something that resonated with us as a channel, because that's kind of what we're about as well. So I guess that could be part of the reason we saw an affinity with you guys for quite a while, actually, and just being around the group and the socials and chatting amongst ourselves about you. So fair play for that, I guess, is what I would say. In terms of your tokenomics, I think it's 60% of the circulating supply is available at token generation event. Is that right? 60%, 180 million.
54, I think, right now, man.
Yeah, it actually ended up being a little bit lower, but I mean, generally speaking, if you and obviously you can't necessarily compare to what happened in 2017 and 18, but even the projects that raised during that time and then launched in 2020 or so, you did have some who were who would have their token lockup maybe be anywhere from 10 to 20%, and these would be for other layer ones. So it's not that. I think that there's a bit of a difference whenever you have a sort of the utility token. The native token is for a sort of its own layer one versus a D app that's sort of deployed on top of a platform. There's just a different type of security model that you have to consider, and really you have to and with all of that you get a different token economic model too.
And I guess to kind of simplify that that model is that if more of those tokens are in circulation, that creates more decentralization for the consensus mechanism. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay, yeah. Still though, 60% or whatever it ended up being 54 compared to, I know they're DApp, so it's different, but it did seem like kind of a ballsy move to just like say, try out the tokens, there you go, you decide what they're worth. Yeah, I will move on to a one I saw on Twitter recently, a favorite quote of yours, Antoni, an MC Escher quote. Are you really sure that a floor can't also be a ceiling? Can you talk a bit about that and why that's your favorite quote?
Right. So yeah, my dad's an architect, and generally, you know, he was a fan of Escher, and I kind of inherited it. And I was always taught as a kid to like think outside the box and like never follow the crowd, just think on your own, gather the knowledge, synthesize it like somewhat, and then draw your own conclusions. And I think that with this Escher quote, oftentimes things are not what they, you know, turn out. Oh, maybe scratch that. If you think there's like maybe no way out, or you've got no other options, or you've reached your whatever it is that you wanted to reach, quite often there's much more to it. You just have to look at it from a different perspective or a different angle, and then the whole other, you know, whole new world sort of unveils before you. So that's the idea. Open.
Okay. Yeah, lovely. And Matthew, do you have a quote or a few words of wisdom that kind of you fall back on or you'd like to share?
Yeah, I like to go with the Lewis Carroll quote. I think it was either in Through the Looking Glass or in Alice in Wonderland, where it's I forget which character, but they tell Alice to, you know, start at the beginning and keep going until you reach the end, and then stop.
Yeah, I like that one too. I think, yeah, my favorite is an Irish one. It's Níl aon hón tin mar the hón tin féin, but the original saying is Níl aon hinton mar the hinton féin, which means there's no fire like your own fire. But my mum used to say Níl aon hón tin, which means there's no sore ass like your own sore ass. So that's one that I like. To move on to the community questions, and we got lots of these. First of all, one that popped up in our Telegram group is not a question, but it's from Sammo. He said, no questions, just pass on my thanks for how well they treat the community. They do an amazing job, and other crypto companies could learn a lot from them. They're a class act. So that's a nice way to kick off the community questions, I think. Others where, I mean, I got tons, and I want to just give a few words of thanks to Super Aleph Zero. He's at Aleph Super on Twitter. He was really nice to us in like retweeting stuff like our questions and generating engagement coming up to this interview, which obviously as a newer channel is really important for us. And I'm just going to fire out a couple of his questions, which start off with, are you currently developing dApps on Aleph Zero other than the ones we know about? So I don't know which ones he knows about compared to other people, but maybe you could talk a little bit about dApps on Aleph Zero.
So disclosure first, Aleph Super is Chris. He's a great guy, and he's, I think, one of our first hardcore fans from this year. So the project's not as people, the project.
He might like you too.
No, but right. So the apps working on Aleph Zero, the ones disclosed are Common, which is our AMM DEX, and I wouldn't call Liminal a dApp necessarily, but it is another product that we're working on from the ecosystem perspective. Yeah, so with Common, we're like at the moment just deciding whether it should be a smart contract or whether it should be a substrate palette. You might not even know about it, but that just popped up yesterday. And the second thing is Liminal. So Liminal is our idea for accommodating, you know, people who don't necessarily want to switch over from whatever network they're using at the moment, but still want to use a very efficient privacy engine. So you would just bridge to Aleph Zero through Liminal from I don't know, Ethereum, Terra, Solana, whatever it is. And you can use the native privacy features of Aleph Zero on in your own network. But also, if you do decide to build directly on Aleph Zero, you get those features natively, which means they're just cheaper. So that's the idea.
Yeah, and then also, with a AMM, as far as any automated market maker and a DEX on that, there's a lot of other different technologies that go into this. You can get trust minimized bridges, so being able to connect to other layer ones. While you may not necessarily think of that as it may not have like a DApp token associated to it, it is some fundamental technology for interoperability. So you have that, and even the multi-party computation stuff, it, has other use cases beyond privacy. You get to bridge the Bitcoins of the world, Litecoin, anything that is using a essentially Bitcoin core, but lacks this op script code, the opcodes necessary to be able to do a more robust and larger set of potential smart contracts. So you are limited in some of these other ways of bridging. So then MPC allows you to bridge, say, like I say, these Bitcoins of the world. And then sort of with all this, I think that, you have Liminal, which is, as Antoni brings up, is not necessarily a DApp in and of itself, it's just a product. But we do want to go ahead and kind of start off with Common as our initial DeFi product whenever it comes to the privacy, sort of framework. And then, but this sort of requires a lot of integration between the different moving parts. And then from there, we'll see if it makes sense for us to do anything else beyond just a decentralized exchange, or if it makes sense for us to go into some of these other type of ideas, like a algorithmic stablecoin, similar to MakerDAO, or with our own flavor and twist on it, right? So this is a pretty standard type of things within DeFi, very useful. And there's just a lot of other products that we're looking at, particularly in DeFi, but we want to sort of focus on the first, which is Common, and the DEX, and sort of everything that's needed to make that fairly robust. And then from there, if it makes sense for us to kind of add different privacy different privacy DeFi on top of that, then we can kind of move forward. But we want to sort of go ahead and, like I say, build out the product first, not necessarily, do a lot of other stuff, not necessarily go ahead and hype it. It's really, substance and product before a lot of disclosure on what we may or may not do, because we don't know yet. But the idea is that this is a general purpose platform, right? So it's not about what we want to be building, it's about what other people want to be building. So we want to be building the tools to empower other people to bring their dApps and then bring their applications and to deploy on the platform. Not necessarily just use it as a playground for us. I mean, obviously we have some things that we think we can innovate and provide some additional value that's a little better, at least from our perspective. But we also don't want to necessarily take on be Atlas and carry the burden of the entire world on our shoulders.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in this. I have a very cursory understanding of some of the stuff. Like with multi-party computation, a friend of mine got a job in Credo, and I had to explain it to her because she had to explain it to Credo. And the best way I could do it was, I said, imagine if you had a 3-word private key, and the private key was hold the door, and you had 3 nodes. You'd send the first node you'd send the second node the door, and you'd send the third node hold door. And then the first 2 nodes could verify the second word. The first and the third could verify the first word, and the second and the third could verify the last word. And I was like, they can verify that private key is correct, but nobody knows the entire private key. And that's kind of like that. I'm trying to build up my understanding of it, but I'm just not on a level of.
That was actually a phenomenal explanation on I mean, it's obviously overly simplified, but it's but I mean, in a sense, it's pretty much what's going on. And then the other way, what I like to do is I point out that a lot of the threshold cryptography, the math that's used behind it is very similar in a lot of the same ways. It's almost the exact same. There's just like some small tweaks to how erasure codes work. And so erasure codes have been around since the 50s. And this is what we used whenever we were like updating one of the, I think one of the Viking satellites, whenever it got out of sync, we had to do a software update with it. So this is the same technology used for CD-ROMs, RAID, for your redundant array of independent disks. It's used in Blu-ray discs. It's used for QR codes. I mean, it's pretty ubiquitous, right? But the idea and the principles are pretty much the same. You have some type of information, you add some type of redundancy information, and now you split up this, you split it up in such a way where some threshold of these different pieces can reconstruct the original data. And that's the exact same situation that you have in threshold cryptography. You have some type of redundancy information, and at least in some way, in sort of these shares of the private keys. And then from there, you can go ahead and reconstruct the original private key. And sometimes even do stuff where you can aggregate sort of signed messages and then reconstruct the actual signed message without even revealing the private key. So there's ways of like doing other types of more secure and safe solutions, just beyond just, okay, let's reconstruct this private key. Well, we may not even want to ever disclose that private key. We may just want to go ahead and sign a message. And can we sign a message without revealing our underlying key share? Which is, because what that allows you to do is sort of sign multiple messages with the same, sort of a threshold key.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things, like when from the other interview I saw, one of the things that clicked with me about this was the front running trades. And then that, obviously with the multi-party computation, I was like, okay, now I get it. A couple of the nodes get who's doing the trade. A couple of other nodes get the amount. A couple of other nodes get the instrument being traded. But nobody has all the information to potentially front run that trade, or, you know what I mean, obfuscate, I don't know if it's the right word, but you know what I mean, mess around with the market in that way. But then even in other things, like away from like finance, with stuff like, in medicine, in patents, in sensitive information, stuff like that, like a protocol like this could be huge.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where you have things more along the lines of file storage, right? Beyond just so you have data privacy. And then the data privacy itself is more about how do you have a particular, well, there's two things. One is you can just have strictly file storage that's going to be private. And then the other thing is that you can have sort of data privacy, but then you can go ahead and do computations on that data. And so then this is where there's that slight difference between what's going on with, say, the erasure code technology with say CD-ROMs and QR codes versus what's going on with the multi-party computation technology, is that you get some type of redundancy and sort of privacy in both, but in the multi-party computation setting, you actually get to do computations on the data, and you get to manipulate it, and you get to sort of move it around and extract or change it in various ways. And that's not really what you get in this in the erasure code setting.
Okay, we should probably press record again. That was probably like some of the best part of stuff we talked about.
Oh, I think we're recording.
Oh, are we?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, great. So I will, so if we have that, that's brilliant. I will fly on through some other questions from Super Elf because he was brilliant. How will the active validators rotating committee work?
Yeah, so the idea here is we have roughly you'll have a verifiable random function. This verifiable random function will elect some subset of the people who have gone ahead and sort of put their name in the hat, so to speak, to be elected to be a validator. And so now you have this global committee of possible candidates, and from there you want to go ahead and elect randomly their some subset, right? And so then the election is based off of stake weight. So you have essentially this random lottery where your ticket is your stake, or the number of tickets that you have is proportional to your stake weight. Then you have a verifiable random function that can go ahead and just sort of pick people out, and then that will form the committee. And so then what ends up happening is that the consensus layer or the previous committee actually can go ahead and choose the next committee. But I mean, there's other ways that you don't have to necessarily have the previous committee do this, the verifiable random function. There's other ways of doing it too. But that seems to be most likely the simplest option.
And I guess what that's the solution to on a higher an overview level with DAG technology is that randomly selecting these nodes solves the problem of decentralization with the DAG.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely not the first to do something like this. I think what you have is essentially two different models whenever it comes to electing the committee and the validator set. And the one model is you just use the top weighted voted validators, and then they sort of stay in and they're constantly the ones who are in the committee. Maybe there's some rotation and churn down at the bottom or for the least voted in validators, but for the most part, it's fairly static. So you don't really have a lot of dynamicism. And then the second model is the one that I just explained, where you have a little bit more dynamic rotation between different epochs. And I think that, or not just me, but we find that to be a little bit more robust whenever it comes to being decentralized than just say, okay, well, let's just pick the top weighted voted candidates and only have them be running the validators, being a part of this validator committee. And like that just doesn't necessarily scream large decentralization, right? It really kind of says, okay, well, we're only going to be keeping the people who already have a lot of capital, who already have a lot of stake. They're going to be the ones who are primarily getting most of the more of the rewards. We want to go ahead and actually empower people to sort of run their own nodes as well. And make it fairly reasonable where they could still have that opportunity to participate and not necessarily rely on a lot of the centralized larger players who might have more capital to constantly be elected.
Okay, yeah, so a lot in there for sure, but I mean, I guess that's why you guys are paid the big bucks, right? To make these difficult decisions on consensus protocols and how they work. The final one from Super Aleph was, is it going to be possible to buy via Common DEX with a credit or debit card?
So it's a question of on-ramp, off-ramp fiat. So we don't have any decisions in this regard yet. I mean, obviously, we want to make it as easy for users to get on board into crypto. And we do have a friendly company that is doing a very cool fiat off-ramp on-ramp solution, Ramp Network. So no decisions, probably, if doable.
Yeah. I think that the answer here is that we're not looking at directly doing this ourselves, but there's plenty of players in the space who are. And this is a public or permissionless platform, so if they see the value in either deploying their current framework onto Aleph, we're more than happy for them to do so. And then if others who are able to sort of break into this particular business model want to go ahead and do this first on Aleph, before they do it on anybody else or any other layer one. Obviously it's a free market and people are allowed to can go ahead and do this. So I think it's more about yeah, it would be great if that were to be the case, but we have limited resources. It's not necessarily something where we want to be going ahead and sort of operating a money service business and dealing with a lot of that.
I mean, it's a main challenge from a regulatory standpoint and legal standpoint. So we wouldn't be doing it ourselves, like definitely. Because as Matt points out, this is definitely not our priority as an organization or as a project or as a team, but the awareness of people needing this type of solution makes us very open to external partners.
Yeah, gotcha. I think that's very clear. So a couple from Blessed in our Telegram, who is really active member of our community and just an all-around absolutely lovely guy. Any upcoming partnerships or recent partnerships that you're particularly excited about?
Well, Supra is nice. I think the general Oracle space with APA 3 and training as well. This is going to be interesting. And what we're aiming for is providing developers with choice. So we want to be one of the infrastructure layers that enables people to choose, for instance, a preferred Oracle provider. As far as upcoming partnerships, yeah, kind of disclose that really.
Yeah. Makes sense. And the second was, will you be EVM compatible? I think you've already kind of hinted that. No.
So we won't be, because there's too much sacrifice on the performance end. Although we recently revisited the topic from a user base growth perspective, but for now the decision is that we won't be EVM compatible.
Okay. And a couple more here. Are you looking for any further VC funding?
Right. I think at this point or in the current stage, it's not about fundraising anymore. So if we would be looking for VC funding, that would be more like, I would redefine it as a VC partnership. And effectively, the only funds that we're accepting at the moment have to do with significant added value, meaning somebody opening the doors to a different ecosystem or to a group of potential use cases. And then we're already starting to design the ecosystem fund for Aleph Zero. So we're also going to be looking to partner up with some institutional investors on that front, just to be able to offer teams building on top of the network some additional support.
Yeah, and I think that's something we're seeing a lot in the industry at the minute. If you want to get involved in a funding round with a solid project, it's more about what value can you bring aside from the money that you're investing. In terms of Nick the G at Progressive, I'm getting confused by that sorry. But he had some questions on staking in general. So number one, when will the nodes be available to the public? And number two, when will the collateral, or what will be the collateral to operate a node? Is there a plan for a staking event? And we'll take the other two separately. But yeah, just those three around staking, the requirements for nodes, and if they're available to the public.
Yeah, so let me answer the second question. The first question is more of a question on timeline and roadmap, and obviously we want to be, we want to have staking as soon as we can, but at the same time we need to make sure that we prioritize safety of the network and stability before we start adding in additional features like staking. So it is being worked on. We have to do our own separate staking palette. And sort of there's some different logic that we want to do that is a little bit simpler than what currently exists with Substrate's default choices. So I mean, it just takes a little bit more time because we're doing a little bit more bespoke solutions. As far as the amount that's needed as the bond, what you'll need to have is about 10%. So we're going to do a 10% collateralization that's required for any amount that is delegated to your validator account. So normally you would run, sort of if you're just the only one staking and nobody else is delegating to your particular account, then you'll have a hot wallet that would have 10% of the balance, and then you'd have a cold wallet that you've delegated to your account that is going to be have the other remaining 90%. So the idea here is that your stake weight is going to be limited by 10 times whatever your bonded amount is. So if you have somebody who goes ahead and delegates to you, and now the total delegation amount that you have is in aggregate more than 10 times, then you're sort of limited to sort of that floor voting weight.
Okay, and moving on from staking, then I think there's a few of these kind of questions that are, I think, further down the line than the kind of where you guys are thinking right now. But are you guys planning to develop any Android Apple Wallet application?
But that's, yeah, so for the network, no, because that wouldn't probably make much sense, but for common, potentially. I mean, we're right now in the middle of like user of the discovery process. Actually, how do people use DEXs? What are the different levels of sophistication to their use? Would they categorize themselves as power user? And if so, do they need a mobile app? Do we have a majority of power users versus, you know, your entry level users? So no decision has been made in this regard. Definitely, we're going to have a desktop, and most likely we're also going to have like common light and a common pro type of solution. But when it comes to mobile, I remember talking with Matt on multiple occasions. And for instance, I love, you know, mobile anything, but Matt trades on desktop and I think doesn't touch mobile except for just checking the accounts. So generally speaking, we need this to be backed by a business decision based on the projected user base. And so on and so forth. And the lead on that is being taken by our UX specialist Mateusz, who just recently joined, and I'm very happy that he did.
Because you don't have to think about it so much now. Okay, so we'll move on from there then. I think, well, this is kind of in contrast to something I read, but are there any concepts for feeless transactions? For example, in the industry, companies will not accept fees for their millions of transactions. Even a fraction of a cent will be too much for them with the high transaction amount. This could leverage in high costs. So yeah, feeless transactions on Aleph, discuss, please.
Yeah, so there's two different approaches with this. One is obviously trying to make just the fee cost as low as possible, but then also in doing all of that, what we can possibly have is sort of a subscription-based model, where if you have corporates or enterprises or anybody, you know, you have sort of an open auction regarding sort of this subscription pricing. And so then now you go ahead, you bid on it. Maybe it happens once a quarter, maybe it's once a year. It really doesn't matter. But now, as far as an enterprise is concerned, you have a fixed cost associated to a certain number of transactions and sort of the actual cost. And I think a lot of it is more about having a proper pricing model, as opposed to having a lot of dynamicism in the potential cost, because you have this appreciating asset, you know, at least relative to, or potentially appreciating, but a very dynamic,
careful,
a very dynamic, you know, price point relative to fiat. And since most, you know, almost everybody in the world uses, you know, whatever the local currency is for tax purposes and for accounting, it doesn't really make sense to price the cost at least for corporates, it doesn't make sense to price the cost in a token. And so then that would be one direction, would be having this sort of subscription-based model. The other option, and we're still looking at how this could possibly work, is instead of paying for a fee, you would have if you own Aleph tokens and they're sitting in your account, you would get some type of access to some number of quote unquote free transactions. So you're given some type of allotment based off of your total amount that you have in your account, and then also based off of the amount of time that you've been holding the coin. So, you know, based off of these two metrics, then you're sort of given, or you're sort of allotted rather, you know, some number of free transactions. And then the idea here is that as you use up that allotment, eventually, if you're using the network quite a lot, then you're going to run out, and you're no longer going to have any free transactions available to you. And then at this point, this is whenever you're going to go ahead and start paying for the transactions, once you sort of have depleted your sort of a free free amount.
Okay, like what's coming across here is there's so many big decisions to be made for you guys all the time on so many facets of the business. Like this.
Well, I mean, with all these things, it's like, it's not that they are big decisions, but at the same time, it's really more about what is going to, you know, we want to, you know, take an approach where it's more feedback loops with the community, and trying to get an understanding of, you know, how is the market going to react to particular choices and designs. It's not that these are are terribly difficult in and of themselves, right? It's really more about how is the general community going to react, or do they want to have some type of more decision making and suggestions on what the choices are, and I think that it's really just more about also doing a little bit more analysis and saying, okay, we have this idea, and the idea is like this. I think this has been used in a couple of other projects with say file storage. I think yeah. So I forget the name of some of these projects that have done this, but the idea is that by holding the coins, then you're given sort of some free access. This is different than just directly paying. The only but at the same time, it's been done to an extent before. So it's not like that this is not a completely new model, but we do want to take a step back and we want to do some analysis on it, and the actual mathematical analysis and any rigorous proof that would go with it to sort of provide some some type of fundamental basis to say that this is actually secure and that this is actually safe. That's probably more what we want to go ahead and do prior to actually implementing a solution. It's not that we can't just implement the solution. That's we can innovate all day long and we can go ahead and just deploy it. But if but that really sort of is counter to really how we've been doing all of our other decision making, which is to sort of take a step back and have an understanding. Does this actually work from a mathematical perspective, from a security perspective? And then if it does, then we can go ahead and start the implementation process.
And as well as part of that, the kind of, I think using the community perhaps as a bit of a sounding board for some of these ideas.
A bit of a sounding board. I mean, obviously we have a lot of our own sort of directions that we want to take with it, but we also kind of want to sort of bounce it off of them and see what the general reactions are.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, the more you involve people, the value of a community, I think, in crypto is tremendously undervalued by a lot of projects. But the sense I get from you guys is that's definitely not the case here.
I mean, you've got the beautiful thing about this is that you've got your user group right there, right? So you've got both institutions as well as individuals across the Telegram groups and Discord groups and on Twitter. So if you're looking for market feedback, you just need to reach out and ask. And this is, like, to me, from a product or marketing perspective, this is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, it's something we do a lot as well. If we're talking about video ideas, or even was doing a Polkadot video the other day on price prediction, I was like, guys, what do you think about this model for predicting the price of some chains relative to Sammo? Got some good feedback, changed the way we did the video, but we'll find out if it's more accurate or not when they launch, I guess. But yeah, definitely community is huge in blockchain and something that a lot of projects do undervalue. In terms of this one from Marty, Aleph Zero, how do you attract programmers?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a tough question, right? I mean, not just an easy question, but tough answer, because everybody's trying to attract programmers. And so I think that what we're aiming for is trying to build out a tool suite for developers that is easy to use, but then also making sure that we're integrating a broader ecosystem than just sort of developing our tools from scratch. And this is probably the biggest benefit that we have when we chose Substrate as our smart contract and sort of general blockchain framework, because it's not just us building out that entire technology stack. Now we have this wider community supported by the Web3 Foundation, supported by all these other projects as well who are building on top of Substrate. And now you have all the tools that they've built that we can also go ahead and either modify, or the community themselves can repurpose, to go ahead and deploy on Aleph. So I think it's also just more about not necessarily leveraging it's more about leveraging the open source community and sort of providing additional tools for them to use, as opposed to just, okay, well, let's just design everything from scratch. It's going to take longer, and it's going to be you don't have a lot more cross purposes anymore. I mean, you have people who now have to learn a completely new framework. And this just does not really bode well for adoption. So, this is one of the reasons why we have substrate. And then obviously you have all your other standard type solutions. So going to hackathons, partnering up with different university systems and trying to get students involved and learning how to either code or willing to deploy applications on the platform. Just general things like this.
Yeah, but Adam, Damien, and Michael, they lead the university course at Jagiellonian, which is the oldest Polish university. So this is quite useful, and we have also value adding. When it comes to attracting developers through campaigns or building awareness, we don't think we're at a stage where we should overdo it just yet, because there's no documentation. There are no smart contracts on the testnet, and yes, you can use the generic ones, the generic ink smart contracts from Substrate, but then again, you want this environment to be sort of more on the Aleph side as well. And we're also looking for a developer relations person, so that you have a dedicated job, and your job is just to take care of the developers and incoming queries. Because if we do generate too much of an interest right now, then we're just not going to be able to benefit from the incoming traffic.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, interesting to hear actually that you'd have a job dedicated to just managing relationships with developers. I guess a lot of it comes down to excitement, right? If good developers are excited about what you've built, then you're the place they're going to want to build, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's in your typical businesses, you've got the customer service department, right? So when it comes to the platform, it's hard to call anybody a customer at the moment. But at the same time, everybody's a customer. So both the developers, community members, contributors, institutional investors, whoever it is, and we need to take care of the developers' needs, so that when they actually want to interact and the documentation is foolproof, that's great if they can build it out on their own. But if they want to reach out, then they should always have the option of doing so.
Okay, so a couple of forward-looking questions now. First of all, a kind of more short-term one. What will Q1 of 2022 looks like? And this comes from Kalu on Twitter.
Yeah, I hope it's gonna look a lot less sleep deprived. So that's the first thing. The second is we want to make some key decisions with regards to smart contracts and with regards to the privacy part, as well as the ecosystem fund. So yeah, I think these are the main decisions. The second one is, or the second subset of decisions, has to do with organization building itself, because we're growing. And we're scaling, and we've split what was not that long ago a single large development team into 3 separate teams. Now we're in the process of restructuring marketing and communications internally, meaning there are some decisions, as in, do you want to improve the self-managing skill set of your team, or do we want an external traffic manager, and so on and so forth. So both on the technological and product side, decisions regarding smart contract staking, as well as Liminal ZK. On the organizational side, just pains of becoming a bit bigger than we were.
Yeah, so I think that the question is probably more along the lines of what products are we looking at having released in the first quarter. So if you look at our roadmap, just generally speaking, the idea is to push for staking and validators, and for opening up both the testnet, and then as we have the testnet running with the community, from there being able to upgrade that to the mainnet. And then sort of simultaneously, as Antoni brings up, we have separate product teams. So then that's going to include different bridging technologies, and then eventually, hopefully, maybe towards the end of Q1, we would be looking at common. But that's obviously there's no definitive roadmap because development is going to take as long as development's going to take. And anybody who's ever been a software developer or who has been in this industry for any amount of time understands this.
Yeah, okay, I get you. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner for sure. To take like I guess a wider view look at it, there was a couple of people asking. One was Soner Chelanoglu. I won't try again. I think that was probably close enough. Who asked, where will Aleph be in 10 years? Do you dream about it? So I know, again, with specific timelines and stuff like that, it's hard to say exactly, but like, what is the dream for Aleph Zero in big picture terms? Where would you like to see the project go? Not specifically over 10 years, let's just say, going forward over the long term.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I would really like to see a lot of it to be very community driven. It's not necessarily about us. It's really what do people want to do with this, and then sort of second from there, I just would like to see more. I think it'd be great to actually have corporates or enterprises actually deploying applications on top of a public blockchain, but then still using the privacy framework for because as a company, obviously there's going to be certain data they don't necessarily want to disclose, and maybe it makes sense for them to use a sort of some privacy solutions. So I think just generally speaking, I just want to see people use the technology, and that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm in a similar position. I really hope that from like hoping is I know in a business sense is not the perfect word, but it's from a personal perspective. In 10 years or 20 or 30, I want to be around first and foremost, like a person living and breathing, and second, if we'll manage to build something that people use, as Matt said, then being able to look back on that road to adoption, this is going to be like really an amazing award for the time that that we spent on this already. So the thesis of like enterprises actually switching to a public blockchain from, for instance, permission solutions, that would be something really cool to see.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, huge goals in mind, but as always, same with us. I think same with everyone is a good word to finish on. Always make sure you enjoy the journey there, right? That's just as important as the end goal. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I think that just about got through everyone's questions. I learned a lot for sure. I hope you guys who watched learned a lot. Just genuinely grateful for the two of you taking the time to do this. It's very much appreciated, and a pleasure to meet you both. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. Appreciate being here, and thanks to the community for asking all those questions.
Yeah, thanks Ian and everybody else. Hopefully we can do this again.
Yeah, 100%. We'll look forward to it. Cheers, guys. All the best.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.